I'm doing well. Yeah, how about you?
I am doing well. I'm just trying to figure out how to avoid blowing up the audio in the room because the echo is pretty bad.
Okay.
So I might just be sitting out here in the hall and asking people to come out here if they want to ask you questions.
Okay. Yeah. Well, whatever
All
you
right,
want.
so I've got Matt. Let's everybody file in except for me. How's your day going?
You know what? It's going well. So I have 9 kids, and so they all go to a private school, Christian school here in Central Oregon, and they have a spring musical every year. So a couple years ago, my kids were like, "Dad, you should be in the spring musical with us." And I've known nothing about theater, and I never did any theater. But I was like, "Hey, if my kids want me to do this, I'll do it." So we're in this spring musical. So I started doing it a couple years ago, and we're doing Music Man this year. So I had theater practice this morning, but glad to be able to join you guys this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you for being with us. It's a bit of a drive, so virtual
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
I really wanted to come actually, and then I started looking at how far it was going to actually be, and it just wasn't going to work. Like I think it's about 8 hours or so, maybe from here to you guys are in Pocatello today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our current chair drove down from Coeur d'Alene, and it's about the same distance there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things that when you start talking, we get a lot of media attention. We get a lot of people from the East Coast, and we actually get a ton of international attention. I've probably hosted 30 or 40 different international journalists at my home here in Central Oregon. And they just are astounded at how big these Western states are. And that's part of the reason, that's part of our argument why it doesn't make sense for Eastern Oregon to be part of Western Oregon is we're nothing like Western Oregon. We're hundreds of miles away, completely different climate, completely different geography. But when you bring people, especially from Europe over here, they're just like, oh my gosh, this is huge, and it is.
Yeah. All right. So it is noon. I think everybody is in the room who's going to be in the room, except for me, because I'm outside of the room. If people want to say something to Matt, just run outside and speak it into my phone so that we don't get big echoing noise. But other than that, I'd like to thank Matt McCaw of Greater Idaho for speaking to us today, and floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Matt, for having me. And I want to say thank you too. We've been doing this now. I've been involved in this movement for been 5 years now, and the movement's just a little bit older than that. And we have gotten so much support from libertarians across the nation, but especially here in Oregon and Idaho. And you would think Republicans are the majority of people that live in Eastern Oregon, right? You've got conservative people. You'd think the Republican Party would be really supportive of our efforts because it's mostly Republicans that are voting for it. But we found that not to be the case. But we have found that the Libertarian folks in the Libertarian Party has been incredibly supportive of us, and I've gotten to speak with the Oregon Libertarian Party at their convention, and now with you, and I'll be headed to New Hampshire later next month to speak at a national event, and so it just really goes to show that our idea is a liberty-minded idea. It's how do you get people better government that gives people more liberty and makes sense for people and people that are libertarian and involved in your politics and in your party get that. And I really appreciate your support and the opportunity to come and present. So I will, I know, Matt, that you had said you had a couple things you wanted me to focus on, which is great, which I will. I also want to leave a lot of room for questions because I know, even though here in the Northwest, in Idaho and Oregon, people know a lot more about Greater Idaho than people across the country, but there's still a lot of people that don't, and they don't understand the nuts and bolts, and they don't understand, what that would mean, what that looks like. So I want to leave a lot of time for questions, and I'll do just a real quick, kind of 10-minute overview of how we got here, what Greater Idaho is all about, if that's all right. And then, and then we'll get to kind of a Q&A section. So Matt, I don't know if I'm able to share my screen. I'm not super familiar with this platform. Is there a share screen button here? Maybe not. Oh, start screen sharing. Okay, great. Bear with me just a minute. Here's what I want. Okay. So hopefully you guys can see this. And it's just a map of the United States. There, and there's our border that we're wanting to change. So real quick, here's where I live. My name's Matt McCaw. I'm the executive director of Greater Idaho. I live where the star is, which is what we're hoping is the new western border of the state of Idaho. And I love to show this overhead map without any lines on it, because when you look at a map like this, it's so obvious just from the geography and the climate why it makes zero sense for Eastern Oregon to be associated with Western Oregon. Once you get west of the Cascade Mountain Range, which is right there a little west of that star, the entire geography changes, the entire climate changes, the economy changes, and of course, the politics and the culture change west of the Cascades. So that map shows you where I live and in Idaho as well. Here's my family. Here's what it looks like where I live. This is Smith Rock, if anybody's ever been to Central Oregon. It's just high desert.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, before you go on, I think we're seeing the presentation draft, not you presenting. So we're not seeing you change the slides.
Oh, okay. All right. Is that better?
That is better.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. For some reason, when I went into view mode, so I will try to, there, we'll just have to do this the old fashioned way. So sorry about that. Let me go back here. This star is where I live. I won't rehash that. But what is the problem? We've all seen this map. So is this, you guys can see this now, the map with all the counties?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. We've all seen this map. This map comes up every time there's a presidential election, and it's, you have all of these red counties, and you have these few blue dots and blue urban areas. And so it's created this problem in the United States that as these urban areas have grown and the populations have gotten so big, and even more so because the culture of our cities has gotten so different than the culture of the rest of our rural areas or even our suburban areas in a lot of ways, it has led to a loss of self-determination for people in rural areas. In Oregon, for instance, and you can see on that map below, the state of Oregon is 36 counties and only about 6 or 7 are left-leaning. But those 6 or 7 left-leaning counties make up, well over half of the population. Multnomah County alone, where Portland sits, is about 850,000 people and votes 75 to 80% left. So the county of Multnomah County determines what happens across the state of Oregon because so many people are packed in there, and it's so overwhelmingly partisan to the left side of the political aisle. So the rest of the state, all of Eastern Oregon, outside of Deschutes County, the rest of Eastern Oregon is incredibly conservative, rural, and the people who live out here have voted the same way, the way the people of Idaho vote, for decades, and have not gotten the kind of government that they're actually voting for. And that's a problem. You don't really have self-determination. You don't really have the ability to choose your own government if 100% of the people that live in your community that has a radius of 150 miles, if 100% of people there voted for a certain kind of government and you still can't get that government, that's not really self-determination. So that's a problem. But there's a solution, and that solution is you can allow people to change their borders. Borders are imaginary lines. They were placed here at a point in time. They can be changed. They have been changed numerous times throughout the history of the United States. There's been, well over, 40, 50 interstate compacts that have changed borders throughout the history of the United States. So it's a tool that you can use to group similar peoples that exists, and there's a process, and we could be using it, but for whatever reason, over the last 100 years, we've stopped using it. So you can use a border to group similar people. So we know that the people of Eastern Oregon are similar to the people of Idaho because they vote the same way, their cultures are the same way, their economics is the same way, and their politics is the same way. And so there was an economic study that was done a couple years ago in 2023, and what they found is that Eastern Oregon counties are almost exactly like Idaho counties. And this makes sense. If you just look at the map and you look at the geography, of course, these counties have the same geography. They have the same climate. People make their money essentially the same way. It attracts a certain type of person to live in a more rugged, harsh environment like Eastern Oregon and Idaho than it does to live in the Willamette Valley. So it attracts the same kind of people, same sorts of communities have formed over time. So we should be using borders to group those similar peoples so that we lower political tension and get people the kind of government that they want. The other advantage of using a state border to change governance for people is that it really is the kind of solution that almost everybody says they want. People are looking for peaceful political solutions that solve problems. And that's what this does. This is a peaceful political solution that says, we want to take these 400,000 people that live in Eastern Oregon, move them into the state of Idaho. We don't want to take anything from the state of Oregon. We don't want to force anything on the people of Western Oregon. And in fact, by us leaving, because Eastern Oregon is incredibly conservative, 70 to 75% vote red, by letting those 400,000 people go and join like-minded people in Idaho, the people of Western Oregon actually have more political clout. They can better enact policy that makes sense for the west side of the state. So it lowers political tension, peaceful political solution that lowers political tension. This is what almost everybody says that they actually want. So first question we get is, can you do this? Is it legal? I mentioned earlier, it is legal. So Article 10 of the Constitution allows states to do this. When our states joined the federal, United States, they did so with having enormous power at the state level. And our Constitution allows states to have that kind of power. So it allows any two states in the Union that border each other to change that border. So any state, Oregon and Washington, for instance, and you'll see that here on this slide, and it'd be nicer if it would pop in like it's supposed to, but I'll just have to walk through each of these things, is that any two states that border each other can change that line if both states agree to it, which makes sense. Oregon has a certain amount of autonomy. Idaho has a certain amount of autonomy. But if Oregon and Idaho say, you know what, where our border is just this arbitrary line that is actually separating like-minded people, and it's causing problems, not solving problems, we'd like to move it 200 miles west. If the two states agree to that, they do something called an interstate compact. That happens, goes to the US Congress, Congress approves, and the border changes. Process has been used dozens of times. It actually happened in Oregon and Washington in 1958. Most people have no idea that this happens, that it happens even recently. 1999, Nebraska and Missouri relocated their border. These have been small changes, the recent ones, but they're using the same process. It's 100% legal, and there is a political process for it, which makes sense. If you look at something like redistricting, we already take imaginary lines and move them around every 10 years. And we do so, and it makes a huge difference in representation. And we move these lines for representation purposes, and it has a gigantic impact. We're moving elected representatives from one state to another every 10 years in reapportionment. We're moving invisible lines around groups of people to get them better representation. And borders, imaginary lines, that is their purpose. Group similar peoples for better representation, better government. It's something we already do every 10 years. Nobody bats an eye about that. The only thing you ever hear people complain about redistricting is when people are gaming the system for political gain. But the idea of getting redistricting and moving imaginary lines to get people better representation and getting representation into states that have grown in population, almost everybody agrees on these ideas, and because they should. That's the whole purpose of representational government. So how does this play out in the state of Oregon? Well, we already talked about Multnomah County is about 850,000 people, makes up about 20% of the state's population. So whatever Multnomah County decides happens across the rest of the state. It was never designed to be this way, but it's something that has happened, and it was predicted to happen by the people that first lived here. So if this map in the upper left-hand corner is a picture of what Idaho, Oregon, and Washington looked like before the borders were set for these 3 states. So it used to just be one big Oregon territory, and they started dividing this up. And when Oregon first got its border in the first place, they had a convention, a constitutional convention in 1857, and they had 60 delegates that were at this border or at this convention. And of the 60 delegates, 59 of those delegates were from west of the Cascade Mountain Range. So the west part, the Willamette Valley, which already was having more population than the east side for obvious reasons. So they had 59 delegates from the west side of the state, 1 delegate from all of eastern Oregon. And that 1 delegate in that first constitutional convention said, I think our people out here in eastern Oregon, or the Oregon Territory, Wasco County is what it was at the time, said, we should put the border on the Cascade Mountain Range, because clearly the Cascade Mountain Range is the geographical boundary between these 2 regions that are different geographically, different climate-wise, and will be different. They'll have different growth patterns. People will be different. It's a great divider. That's where the line should go. It went to a vote. The delegates, the 59 delegates from the west side of the state said, no, we want all of that land all the way out to the Snake River, essentially. We want that land so that Oregon has a big presence on the map. We have more land, more resources. So this problem was predicted by the people that live here 168 years ago, that this would be a problem. It is a problem. They were right. They were forced into this association with the Willamette Valley all those years ago, and it's still a problem today. So I put on the bottom here, there's a link. There's a couple links. One is it's a newspaper article from the Oregon paper at the first constitutional convention that talks about the discussion that was had between the delegates. It's really interesting. Most people, again, have no idea that this is the history of how this border came to be here. But essentially, you can see in print the thinking of Western Oregonians, which was, we want more land, we want more clout, so we're going to take this whether the people that lived there want it or not. And that's what happened 168 years ago, and it's still what we're running into today. Also, there's an link on the bottom left there that's got about a 3-minute video. PBS in Idaho came out here, and they did a really comprehensive story on our movement. And it was a full half-hour program on Greater Idaho. They did a great job. They were very fair. But part of that 30-minute program, they had this like 3-minute segment on the history of the border and how it got to be there. So it's really interesting and worth your time of checking it out if that's something that interests you. But the point being that this imaginary line to create Oregon, there were people that predicted a long time ago that this was going to be a problem, and it was exactly as they foresaw. So how would this help Idaho? So one of the questions that I get is that we want to move this border, but oftentimes people say, well, does Idaho even want you? How does this help Idaho? Did anybody ask Idahoans? And all great questions, because Idaho, you guys have it, from my perspective as a conservative person in Eastern Oregon, you guys have it really good in Idaho. You have, a government that's pretty conservative, and, of course, always people would like, things to be more so the way they want them. But compared to what we deal with here in Oregon, you guys have it great. You have no obligation to take us on. So why would you consider taking us in? And so there's lots of benefits actually for the state of Idaho and the people of Idaho. Primarily, number one at the top of that list is that Eastern Oregon would be adding 400,000 like-minded voters. Idaho is a very conservative state. Eastern Oregon is a very conservative state. The people of Idaho have made known to us that they would like Idaho to remain a conservative state. They're not interested. There's a lot of fear of Idaho becoming what happens with Oregon, where Portland gets really, Portland got so big and so liberal that it takes over the whole state. People fear that that could happen with Boise. Adding 400,000 like-minded conservative voters to Idaho would help keep Idaho for the foreseeable future. So that's a huge benefit to Idahoans. The economic growth that would come from adding these Eastern Oregon counties. So there was an economic analysis that was done in 2023 I referenced earlier, and that economic analysis looked at adding the Eastern Oregon counties to Idaho. And what they found is that Eastern Oregon counties are incredibly similar to Idaho counties in economic output. So adding Eastern Oregon counties would not be a drain on the state of Idaho. In fact, it would be a slight addition of tax revenue for the state of Idaho. But even more importantly, what would happen is that they predicted that by bringing these Eastern Oregon counties into Idaho governance, that those counties their economies would take off. Over here in Oregon, we have extremely prohibitive business law, environmental regulations. It's hard to run businesses. It's hard to get increased economic output because there's so many rules and regulations that you guys don't deal with in Idaho. And when an independent economic analysis was done, they said, man, get these Eastern Oregon counties into Idaho. Not only are they going to instantly be, equitable to the counties in Idaho, but we predict that those economies would take off and long-term would be a huge boon economically to the state of Idaho. So Eastern Oregon also has a ton of land, ton of resources, would almost double the size of Idaho geographically. Why is that important? Well, you all live there. You know how many people have been pouring into your state over the last, since COVID especially, but even before COVID. One of my best friends is like a lot of people in Oregon, lived in Eastern Oregon, said, I can't do this any longer. Moved to the Boise, metro area in Meridian. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people just like that, political refugees that are pouring into Idaho to get the kind of governance that they want and to get away from the blue state governance. And that puts a strain on Idaho. And that has, there's a lot of economic growth is great, but it changes your communities and areas that were once pretty rural are becoming kind of suburban, and there's only so much space. People are going to continue seeking out Idaho because Idaho's offering the kind of state governance that people want to raise their families in and run their businesses. So adding Eastern Oregon almost doubles the size of the state. It would give people places to go besides having to go to Boise. They could go to Central Oregon, which is an amazingly beautiful place and offers all sorts of great benefits. And they could go to southeastern Oregon and Klamath Falls, and it would give Idaho a ton of room for those refugees, political refugees, to go to. Another advantage is it pushes Oregon law further away. I was a couple years ago, I was in Boise to talk to the legislature, and they asked me to come on a radio program, and I fielded questions, and most of the questions I got were regarding Oregon's, bad policy. And how do we make sure we like it? We understand, that you people think like us and want to join us, but how do we know you're not going to come over here and force all this bad policy that we already see on our border and don't like? Well, adding or moving that border 200 miles west pushes that law further away. The homelessness issues that we deal with here in Oregon, the crime issues that we deal with here in Oregon, this would, moving the border would push those over the Cascade Mountain Range. So instead of those being 45 minutes from Boise, right there, getting to Ontario, you'd have to go all the way west of the Cascades to deal with that. The consequences of some of that Oregon law. And then lastly, and maybe even the most important thing, is that people that are liberty-minded, people that believe in self-determination, people that support government by the people, for the people, and with the consent of the people, they want to act out those actual values. And by supporting the people of Eastern Oregon who have voted and said they want to join Idaho, Idahoans would have a huge satisfaction of saying, like, hey, we helped these people leave this bad situation and join a good situation and make our state stronger. So there's tons of advantages for Idahoans, and most Idahoans, and I'll talk about this briefly later, and I'm going to try to speed up here because I'm getting long-winded, I can tell. But when we've asked Idahoans, we have really strong support. But a vast majority of Idahoans support the idea of adding in Eastern Oregon counties. So look at this next slide real quick. The process to moving a border is you have to have popular support from the bottom up. Then the two states agree. They would create an interstate compact. It'd have to get approved by the U.S. Congress. Once those 4 steps happen, the border moves and you have added to your state. So popular support is probably the most difficult to get, but we have it. So we know that the people in Oregon and Eastern Oregon have voted for this. There's been polling done in Northwest Oregon. More people than not in Northwest Oregon believe that Oregon should let Eastern Oregon counties go who voted for this. There's been voting or polling done in Idaho, polls very strongly in Idaho. There was a Trafalgar poll, and I've got a reference to this later, but it asks a whole bunch of questions. But essentially, the people of Idaho very strongly by 20, 30 points plus agree with letting Eastern Oregon counties join Idaho. They see the benefits, they understand why it makes sense, and polling shows that it's very popular. So we know the people think this is a good idea in both states. Legislatively, we've had successes. We've also had struggles. So the next step up that pyramid is you have to get the 2 state legislatures talking. The Idaho legislature has been incredibly supportive of our movement. So in 2023, the House passed a memorial inviting the state of Oregon to begin border talks. The bill went to the Senate. We talked to senators. We believe we had the votes to make it move. What we were told by the Senate leadership was they didn't want to move it. It was a low priority bill until they saw something coming out of the state of Oregon. So it just died in committee in 2023, but the support was there. And we believe that if Oregon had made any kind of effort to make this happen, the Idaho Senate would have passed our bill as well. On the Oregon side, we had a bill in 2023 that was similar to the Idaho bill, and it got completely ignored. The state of Oregon, the Oregon legislature never dealt with it. They just they publicly stated at the beginning of the session that they were not going to deal with it, and it just kind of died. So 2 years later, this current session, we have bills again in the Oregon legislature. They've both been assigned to their rules committee in the House and the Senate side. Again, the Oregon legislature has done nothing so far. We're hopeful that one of these will get a hearing and we'll get some action, but to date, that hasn't happened. So that's where we're stuck, right? Right now, Greater Idaho has the support of the people. Greater Idaho has the support of the Idaho legislature and the governor. So Governor Little has come out on multiple occasions and said that he supports border talks between Oregon and Idaho. And so we have support in Idaho, but the Oregon legislature and the Oregon governor has completely stonewalled us. So one of the things that I think I didn't touch on much, and maybe I skipped over that. Oh, here we go. That's why. Asking the people, one of the things that Matt asked me to talk about was how to get things done at the county level. So I get asked a lot, why do you think your movement has been so successful? And I firmly believe that our movement has been successful because one of the things that we did at the very beginning was we asked the people. We went directly to the people. So this map that you see on the right-hand side here shows the counties that we've asked people in Eastern Oregon whether they want to join Idaho, essentially. And we've been doing that for 5 years through a ballot initiative process. So in Oregon, and I know Idaho has a statewide ballot process. I'm not sure what the initiative process is in Idaho county by county, but in Oregon, we can do the same thing at the county level that we do at the state level, which is you can put a petition out there, and if you get enough signatures from registered voters, they can force a question onto the ballot. So that's what we started doing is we said, we're going to go directly to voters and we're going to ask them. We're not going to rely on elected leaders, politicians to move this idea forward. We're going to go directly to voters and see if this is something they want. That decision at the very beginning of this movement has given it its power, because once you know that the people have voted and said they want to do this, that gives you the political capital, the political data points to force elected leaders into action. So we've had a legislator out here in Eastern Oregon who completely doesn't support this. And just so you guys know, the vast majority of elected leaders even though this is an idea, moving the border, that is very popular. We've won in these 13 counties in Eastern Oregon. We've averaged about 58%. On our questions. 58% support have voted yes on our measures, which is a very solid number. So a big chunk of people, vast majority of people in these counties want to explore being part of Idaho. But the elected leaders who represent these people, the commissioners, the representatives, the senators, the majority of those people, a vast majority, do not want this to happen. And we don't know exactly why that is or why there's this disconnect, but it is real and it's there. And so we have had a really hard time getting any elected leaders at any level to help advocate for making this happen. But because we have been going to voters, as we've racked up the counties, as another county votes and says, yes, we want this to happen, every time that happens, we get a little more support from elected leaders. So it gives you the data point, and it gives you the capital to go to elected leaders and say, I understand you may not want this to happen, but the people you represent do. And they've told us that at the ballot box. And that carries an enormous amount of weight because, again, most people agree our representatives are not there to dictate policy because they're the smartest and the best amongst us. They're there to represent what the majority of people they represent want. And most people agree with that. Most people understand that. Most elected leaders are sensitive to that. And so as we've added these counties, it's been able to encourage, push, force elected leaders to get on board who never showed any interest of getting on board. And like I was saying, an example of that is 2 years ago, even in 2023, when we tried to get a bill in the Oregon House, we could not get a single House representative to sponsor a bill. And nobody would touch it, even though a majority of their counties had voted for it already. It was, for whatever reason, nobody wanted to sponsor a bill. They didn't want to put their name on it. So fast forward from 2023 to 2025, we add 3 more counties that have voted and voted yes. Now we have a bill that was co-sponsored by our representative from Southeastern Oregon, or sponsored by our representative from Southeastern Oregon, co-sponsored by several other representatives. And that's all because of what's happening at the ballot box in these counties. So, when we talk about how can we get more done at the local level, how can we put more pressure for our statewide leaders to act, I think that this county by county, getting it to the people directly is an incredibly effective strategy. Because once you've got the people on record saying something, it's really hard for an elected leader to do the opposite of that. So that's what we did in Oregon is we voted on these 13 counties. You can see a couple counties there that haven't voted yet. At this point, we know, we've done this 13 times in Eastern Oregon, and we know about what percentage we'd get and what that would look like. We have no doubt that they would pass, but we also think that we've had enough counties show what they want to do that we can move forward to the next step. So real quickly, here's that polling I was showing you about Trafalgar Group. This question was, should Idaho prepare to negotiate to add rural counties? You can see, 53% thought yes, 23% said no. If you go to that website link, there's all kinds of questions that they ask people in Idaho about Greater Idaho and adding Eastern Oregon counties. And by and large, there was strong support for adding those counties. So I'm going to jump down here, and I'm going to kind of skip. I thought we could talk about how this could help across the country. There's a really interesting New York Times article that was written a while back around the election time about the self-sorting that's already happening across the United States and how we need to address that. And you guys know that in Idaho, people that are moving into Idaho tend to be more red. Even if they're coming from blue states, they tend to be more red than the people that already live there. People that are moving into Oregon tend to be more blue than the people that are living there. And so we need to politically deal with this as well. There's a lot of places across the country that have movements like this beginning, percolating, and we believe that once the domino, once this happens somewhere, you're going to see a domino effect where you're going to see this happen all over the place. There's a movement right now in Illinois for counties to join the state of Indiana. But essentially, anywhere you have these giant urban centers that dominate state politics and end up forcing really liberal political policy on rural areas, the people in those rural areas are saying, well, why don't we just, like the folks in Minnesota that are saying Minneapolis, St. Paul does not, that those people are nothing like us, but they dominate state politics and they force this policy. Why don't we just join the people of Iowa? What if we just move this border and join Iowa? And there's movements like this all over the country. I get calls from people from Maryland, New York, Colorado saying, how do we start this in our own country? People are ready for different political solutions, better political solutions. I'm going to kind of skip over that and go straight to how people can help, because I want to leave a lot of time for questions. So how can the people of Idaho help? How can just people that care about, freedom and liberty help? Well, they can support our movements directly. So of course we have a website, greateridaho.org. Financially, we can always use help. And that's mostly at this point, the finances we brought in. We're a completely grassroots organization, so nobody gets paid. I'm the executive director. It's essentially my full-time job, but I don't get paid for this job. I'm a small business owner, and I do this because I believe in this, and I'm passionate about it, and that's everybody involved in our organization. So we've been able to get a lot of mileage out of not very much money, which is awesome. But most of that money has gone to running campaigns and fighting. When we have a campaign, at first we kind of flew under the radar, but over the last couple of years, when we would have a vote that was happening in a county, we would get this dark money from Portland nonprofits come pouring into our communities out here. One of the interesting things with everything that the president taking over and Elon Musk and the US aid and all that information is we found that a lot of that US aid money from our own federal government was pouring into these Portland nonprofits, which then go out to our rural communities and try to, influence us and tell us why we should, love all of the liberal policy that they're forcing on us. Totally wrong, but that's what we have to deal with. We would get outspent in our last two elections. We got outspent 5-1 with essentially our own tax dollars, sadly. But you can always help support us financially, which is great. Get signed up for our emails. And really the biggest thing at this point is amplifying our message. Even though out here in the Northwest, a lot of people know about us, nationwide, there's still a lot of people, when you say Greater Idaho, they don't know what you're talking about. But things like Twitter help that immensely. Podcasts help that immensely. I've been very fortunate to get to go on some big name podcasts and let people know what's happening out here. And a lot of times that comes from people just reaching out to those folks. So most recently, a couple of weeks ago, I got to be on the Steve Deace Show, which is a conservative, podcast that's got a pretty good sized, platform. But that all just came from people reaching out to the show and being like, hey, you should have this on. You should have these guys on. There's this thing happening out here. And that's happened multiple times where it's been listeners, it's been people that have reached out and just said, hey, Charlie Kirk or whoever, or whoever you listen to, or the people you listen to, you should have the Greater Idaho folks come on and talk about this. That can help us immensely to get our message out, because every time we go out on a platform like that, people become aware. And once people are aware, almost everybody has the same reaction to this movement. And that's the first thing I think is, can you do that? Can you move a state line? And then once you do, they say, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Of course, Eastern Oregon doesn't fit with Portland. It fits with Idaho. They're the same people. They make their living the same way. So most everybody supports it when they hear about it. So help us amplify our message. Contacting state representatives is super helpful. Like I said, we've had great support in Idaho. Representative Barbara E. Hart has been a huge champion of ours, and Judy Boyle on the west side of the state. That Senator Nichols has been a big supporter of ours. So we've had awesome support from Idaho representatives, but they are sensitive to their constituents. So anytime people reach out and say, hey, are you doing anything to help the Greater Idaho folks? Or thank you for supporting the Greater Idaho folks. We think this is a great idea. We'd love to see that happen. anytime you contact your representatives at the state or federal level, it's helpful. And I will just put another little anecdote in there about that. So when we were 2 years ago, when we were really struggling to get any elected leaders in the state of Oregon to support us and to put forward a bill, we had a legislator finally step forward, and he said to us, I had this one lady and she just kept emailing me about this over and over again. And it really just showed myself, who was not ever involved in politics before I got involved with this 5 years ago, the difference that one person can make, or a handful of people who just take the time to call their elected leaders and reach out to them and show up at county commissioners meetings and things like that. Being that squeaky wheel, putting that out in the ear of your elected leaders can make a huge difference. And then lastly, and then I'll get to the Q&A, is support movements like this across the country. I really believe that state border relocation is an idea whose time has come. I believe the president believes in it. You know, President Trump talks all the time. He was just talking a couple days ago about adding, you know, of course he talks about adding Canada, and who knows how serious he is about that. But he was talking about how the line between Canada and Oregon is just this, you know, imaginary line. Is that really the best place for it? Or is there a better way to group people? And could we add people? He's open to ideas like this. People are open to ideas like this. And once this breaks through somewhere, I think you're going to see things happening all over the place across the country. So supporting movements in Illinois or Maine or Colorado or Washington, Northern California, where you've got movements like this, all of that helps get us to the end goal of better government in the end. So I know that was a lot of information and I talked straight for like 40 minutes. So I apologize for being so long-winded, but I would love to take some questions, and I'll stop the share here and let's see.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Matt. I am sitting outside of the room because of microphone echoing, and so anybody who has a question, just come on right out and you can go ahead and ask questions. So first we got Zach.
Hey there, Matt. So yeah, I'm Zach Kellier, and I just have a question. So I just want to start out by saying I strongly support your movement, and I really appreciate your presentation. But as a libertarian, maybe my interest in this issue might be a little different than some. So the United States currently has a population of about 340 million people, all basically governed by that one city over there on the East Coast that we're all familiar with.
Right.
And Idaho has 2 million people, and you're talking about adding 400,000 to Idaho. My interest in the Greater Idaho movement is that it normalizes secession. It normalizes that things are not set in stone as this giant thing with the 50 states, and they're exactly the way they are, and they always will be. So I love that aspect, and that's why I want to popularize this and other similar movements. Had you guys ever considered simply going your own separate way, these 400,000, and is that something that you thought might not be politically viable, or why did you not go that route?
Yeah, great question, and thanks for that question. And you know, it's funny. I did the Tom Woods show a couple years ago, and I love Tom Woods, and he said the same thing. Like, why do we not have 150 states? Like there's nothing magical about this. Yeah, it looks good on the flag right now, but why are we not using all the political tools we have to get better representation for people? And I completely 100% agree with that. We have chosen not to go our own way as far as creating our own state, because the decision was made when we first started. The process for creating a new state and moving a border are actually pretty similar. But the one thing about creating a new state that causes some political headaches is that a new state would require 2 new federal senators. And so when you move the border, you talk about moving the border between Idaho and Oregon, you're only talking about moving 400,000 people. So right now, Idaho is about 2 million people. You move our 400,000 people in, and it would take 1 representative from Eastern Oregon, who is a Republican currently, and it would add that representative to the state of Idaho. So Idaho would go from 2 representatives to 3 representatives, and it would go from having, what do you have currently, 4 electoral votes to 5 electoral votes. So you're talking about moving 1 electoral vote out of 538. You know, that's less than 0.2%. It's an incredibly small impact federally. And that's really the only federal impact that it would have. By creating a new state, you're going to add 2 new senators. And those 2 new senators coming from Eastern Oregon would be Republican, and they would be representing only 400,000 people. And because both proposals, whether you're creating a new state or you're moving a border, require congressional approval, we just didn't think it was possible that the U.S. Congress would agree to add 2 new Republican senators to represent only 400,000 people, when the state of California is going to say, wait a second, we're 45 million people and we only have 2 senators representing us. So we support the idea of new states. And if somebody came along and said, hey, we want to add Puerto Rico and we'll horse trade you Eastern Oregon for Puerto Rico, we would 100% support the idea of Eastern Oregon having its own state. We just didn't think it was politically feasible for that to happen.
All right, thank you. Now I have David.
Yep, my question was that given that the Oregon legislature seems to be stonewalling your attempts to get them to act in this regard, would it be possible for you guys to somehow do some sort of legal action that might help advance the bill or this movement?
Yeah, that's another great question. So that's one of the questions that we've had a hard time answering. We know that there's a political process for making this happen. We're not sure. That's the honest answer. We're not sure what our legal rights are if Oregon continues to stonewall, because this is part of the problem with the process that we have, is that the people that are, your kind of oppressors that are holding you captive against your will, you got to get permission from them to leave. And people that, are into holding people captive against their will aren't really usually up for just saying, sure, go your own way peacefully. They're going to continue to hold you captive against your will. So we're not sure what that looks like. It's something we've talked about a lot. What are the next steps if Oregon refuses to let us go? What can we do legally? What can we do? We've thought about this as well at the county level. So, like I mentioned earlier, we have a county initiative process in Oregon. So what could we potentially do at the county level to put things in front of voters? Because that really does have an incredible amount of power. When people have voted on something, everybody in this country agrees, hey, once it's 51%, voted on fairly, that's what it is. That's the majority. So what could we do at the county level is something we've thought about. And even more so right now, when I started in on this movement, I talked to a very prominent candidate for Republican governor in the state of Oregon. I wasn't involved in politics at the time at all. I was pretty typical. I had some pretty conservative, libertarian type ideas about the way government should, interact or not interact with people trying to live freely. But I was not involved in politics. So I talked to a guy from church that I'd gone to church with that was running for governor. And he said, don't even bother. Like there's no pathway to make this happen. So don't waste your time. And I didn't take his advice because I thought, the Lord can open up doors, things can change. And it's been really awesome to see in this last year with the election of Donald Trump. We were never quite sure what pathway might exist there if the Oregon legislature refused to let us go, which is what we kind of expected to happen. We thought this was a good idea. We figured the state of Idaho would be open to it, people there, but we always kind of figured the state of Oregon wouldn't want to let us go. But what we've seen with Donald Trump coming into office and with his just kind of hitting the ground running and being willing to look at outside the box ideas, combined with the state of Oregon over the last 5 years, their budget has become almost a third dependent on federal dollars. The state of Oregon has put themselves in a position where the federal government has enormous leverage over the state to make it do what it wants to do. So the state of Oregon has put itself in this position. We have a president who has shown that he's willing to leverage federal influence to get better outcomes for his people. We can see a scenario where President Trump goes to the state of Oregon and says, we're not giving you tens of billions of dollars until you deal with these folks in Eastern Oregon that want to leave. We're not going to let you hold these people captive and still, hand you tens of billions of dollars. We believe that that's exactly the kind of thing that President Trump would do, and we're excited. We could wake up. I put we saw that put this on Twitter not too long ago, but we really believe we could wake up some morning and President Trump could be talking about Greater Idaho in a press conference, and everything that people thought would never happen could start happening. So great question about our legal pathway. We're not sure, but we do believe that there's other ways to get there first.
All right, thank you, Matt. Have Adam here.
Howdy. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I've probably been following the movement somewhere around 4.5 years, 4 years or so. I moved to Idaho from Oregon, though I'm originally from Idaho, and I was on the west side of the state, and I definitely understand and sympathize with the 400,000 that are currently being occupied by Oregon. I've always kind of take a passing interest in these interesting kind of state secessionist movements, and this one's unique for the strategic reasons you said, which I think makes so much sense, and it's so impressive the way you laid that out. But for example, you have like Superior was a state proposal in northern Wisconsin and the UP of Michigan, but right next to you in the northern counties of California and the southwestern counties of Oregon, you've got the proposed state of Jefferson. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how that movement, which I don't know the state of it now. I know it was maybe popular in the 70s, but how that's influenced this movement and the state of Southwest Oregon and their relation to this.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. So, the state of Jefferson, for people who don't know, has been around for decades, and it's actually it had made a lot of progress. And I think, I don't know the history of Super Bowl, but I think it was around World War II. It was really making a lot of progress, and then World War broke out, and it kind of got shelved. And so the state of Jefferson has proposed creating its own state out of Northern California and southwestern Oregon primarily, but also parts of eastern Oregon. And it has influenced, and if you look at our phase 1 map, for one, it influenced us in this idea of, why aren't we looking at using the tools we have, like border relocation or creating new states, to get better government? Does it really make sense to have a state like California that's 45 million people and it's completely dominated by a couple, 3 big metropolitan areas of 5 to 10 million people? Are Northern California states really anything like those urban centers, San Francisco, or of course they're not. And so it doesn't make sense for them to be getting their representation in their government forced on them. And I think the state of Jefferson was one of the very first movements that said, this doesn't make any sense. These people are their own kind of culture, their own economy, their own geography, and they deserve their own representation. And so when you saw even our phase 1 map, when our movement first started, we included Northern California counties. We included 3 Eastern Washington counties that we thought made sense for Idaho. And we included Southern Oregon. And that decision was made based on looking at the way people vote. One of the reasons why we've changed that over the last 5 years is that we discovered through the votes, and again, this was not, we didn't start out with this idea, but we had this came to us by actually asking people what they think. So when we go to a vote in Eastern Oregon, the people of Eastern Oregon are like, please make this happen. Please make this happen if you can. We want to be part of Idaho. And they just, we win, and we win pretty big. We asked voters in Southern Oregon 3 different times, twice in Douglas County, which is about as conservative as you get in Southern Oregon, and then once in Josephine County, and we lost in all 3 of those counties. And if you just look at the way those folks vote, it was surprising to us because we kind of, after doing this enough times, there's kind of a formula. You kind of know, based on how many registered Republicans there are, what you're going to get. And we did not get what we thought we were going to get in those counties. But one of the things that it told us was, the people of Southern Oregon, even though they vote similarly to the people of Idaho, even though they vote similarly to the people of Eastern Oregon, they don't see themselves in the same way as people in Idaho and people in Eastern Oregon. Eastern Oregon people see themselves like Idahoans. And so it's not a stretch to think being governed by Idaho doesn't seem weird. They already, you know, a lot of people in Eastern Oregon, they already do their business in Boise. It's closer to go to Boise for a lot of people in Eastern Oregon than it is to go to Portland. And Boise, you know, even though Boise's, you know, more liberal than most of Idaho, it's nothing like Portland, you know. And so people in Eastern Oregon, they already, Idaho is no big deal. It's right there. But what that told us is for people in Southern Oregon that are 6, 8, 10 hours away from Idaho, they don't identify that same way. And they don't necessarily want the governance. They don't like the governance of Oregon, but they don't want to be Idahoans either. And that was illuminating to us because we kind of thought, oh, well, they'll just, you know, they vote conservative in the same numbers, they'll want to be part of this. And what that told us is that there's more to it than just the political. There's a cultural piece there too that doesn't make sense for Southern Oregon. So, you know, we are a movement about self-determination and getting people government that they actually want. So when the Southern Oregon counties voted no, we changed our proposal and said, you know, let's just move forward with these Eastern Oregon counties that really do want this to happen. Also, I will also say there's still people in the state of Jefferson. There's not a lot of activity with that. The last president that they had has actually joined in on our movement and given his support to our movement. And so because there's not a lot of activity happening with the state of Jefferson right now.
All right, thank you. I have Mike here.
Yeah, you already answered my previous question that I had. So I just wanted to say thank you for sacrificing your time, and thank you to your family for actually trying to promote liberty and bring liberty back to the people. There's not very many people that are willing to sacrifice their time and their money to do that. So just really big thank you for promoting liberty.
Amen.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. You know, I shouldn't take very much credit because up until 5 years ago, I never engaged in anything. I was running my business. We were raising our family, never engaged in any politics. It really was COVID that woke me up, like so many other people, I'm sure, to be like, oh man, if we don't do something quick, it's an ugly future for our country.
Indeed. All right, I have Zach again.
Yeah, I just have one more thing I was thinking of.
Yeah.
During your presentation, you had some different graphics that show the Greater Oregon map, or Greater Idaho, I'm sorry. And some of them included northeastern Oregon. I'm sorry. I feel like some of them had northeastern sections and some didn't. Has that changed over time? And is the map the more vertical looking one, or is it the one that doesn't include the northeastern sections?
Well, I'm not sure. There was one map that showed the counties that have voted and those that haven't. So that might be what you're talking about. Our map has always included all of the Eastern Oregon counties except for the city of Bend, basically. And that is because the city of Bend is the one city in Eastern Oregon, the east of the Cascades, that is fairly urban and very left-leaning. And so Bend is kind of a little Portland is what people in Oregon refer to it as. And because our movement is about self-determination and getting people matched up to government they actually want, we know the people of Bend do not want Idaho governance, and we know Idaho doesn't want the people of Bend. We've been to the legislature, we've talked to the legislature. Again, we have great support in Idaho, but part of that is because they understand that the people that would be moving into Idaho are not going to change Idaho. We're going to fold in and help strengthen Idaho, and bringing in a city like Bend would not do that. But we do include all of the Eastern Oregon counties. There are some maps out there. Our initial proposal, like I said, added 3 counties in Southeast Washington. Just real quick, you didn't ask this, but I'll throw this out there because I literally get emails every day from Eastern Washingtonians asking how they can be part of this or how they can get Eastern Washington on board as well. And we do not plan to add Eastern Washington. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But primarily the 2 big reasons for that are that Eastern Washington is not as conservative as Eastern Oregon and Idaho. So what we have heard loud and clear from Idahoans, legislators, and people is they're not interested in bringing in people that are going to drag Idaho to the left. So Eastern Washington is just not conservative enough. Number 2, Eastern Washington has a ton of people. Eastern Oregon only has 400,000 people. We can be added into Idaho, and not overwhelm the people that already live there. So your voice would not be diluted very much by adding 400,000 people like it would if you tried to add 1.5 million people from Eastern Washington. Then all of a sudden the people of Idaho don't have as much say in their own state, anymore. And that is not our intention at all. We don't think that'd be good for Idaho or Eastern Oregon.
All right, Matt. I have one final question, I think, and then we can let you go. I'm wondering whether you're familiar with the story of how West Virginia came into existence and how that diverged from the official legal process. And if you are, just whether you think there's anything to explore there, trying to say as much as I can without Fed posting.
So I will say, we often get on Twitter or whatever, people say, hey, just declare you're not part of Oregon anymore. Just, there's a lot of people that are fed up. Just do something, don't ask for permission, just do it. That has never been our MO. Our organization is dedicated to working through the political process, and so that's what we're going to continue to do. And what you're talking about there with West Virginia is you had like a separate state or legislature that one was recognized, one wasn't, and it was kind of that. I'm not saying we don't support the idea of independence and declaring independence and things like that, but for our movement, for the Greater Idaho movement, we have a political pathway. It's there. It's got precedence and it's legal, and that's what we're marching down. And we've marched down that path, and we're right at the cusp of making this happen. And like I mentioned, we believe at this point, all it would take is for President Trump and his administration to say, hey, what's going on out there? And it's not right for people who voted to peacefully separate to be held captive against their will. So we don't have any plans to deviate from that process currently.
Thank you. Well navigated.
Well, Matt, I sure appreciate you having me on, and I really appreciate the support again that we've gotten from libertarians, across the country, but especially in Idaho and Oregon. And I appreciate the support that you guys have shown in Idaho. We couldn't be having this conversation if the people of Idaho weren't willing to help us out and bring us into their fold. So we appreciate it. And yeah, if you have anything or further questions or anything, always feel free to reach out to me. It's just matt@greateridaho.org, and I'd love to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Have a great day.
You too.